Marantz, Cambridge, Pioneer. Three names that built their reputation on receivers that audio technicians still talk about today. We opened 5 chassis in 2026. What we found inside tells you everything about what happened to those names and who is responsible. Marantz. Marantz was founded in New York in 1953 by Saul Marantz, an engineer who believed that the gap between what amplifiers measured and what they actually sounded like was larger than the industry acknowledged. The Model 7 preamplifier, introduced in 1958, became the reference standard for an entire generation of audio engineers. The Model 9 monoblock amplifier followed. These were not products designed to a price point. They were products designed to a standard, and that standard was verified by technicians, not marketing departments. Marantz has changed ownership 6 times since the 1970s. The brand passed through Superscope, Philips, Marantz Japan, Sound United, and Massimo, and now sits in Samsung's Harman division, alongside Denon, Polk, and Bowers and Wilkins. 6 ownership changes in 50 years. Each one announced a commitment to the brand's heritage. Each one introduced a cost structure the engineering team had to work inside. What technicians find inside the current Marantz Cinema series is consistent with what that ownership history predicts. The Cinema 50 and Cinema 70S use Class D amplification modules sourced from third-party suppliers. The power supply is a switching design. The crossover processing uses proprietary DSP chips that cannot be serviced independently, and when they fail, the unit is replaced rather than repaired. The build quality inside the chassis uses cost-reduced components in the power supply that technicians flag as the primary failure point under sustained use. The vintage Marantz, the 2270, the 2285B, and the Model 1060 is a completely different engineering proposition. Those units are still on technicians' benches 40 years later, not because they are failing, but because they are still being used. That is what honest engineering looks like across 4 decades. Prices mentioned are US-based estimates. Check your local market. The name on the front panel is the same. The engineering culture behind it is not. Buy this if your budget reaches the Marantz Model 30 integrated amplifier, which carries more engineering continuity with what the brand was built on. Avoid it if you are buying the Cinema series, assuming the Saul Marantz engineering culture survived 6 ownership changes. Open the chassis, and the switching power supply will confirm that it did not. That is the first brand, a 50-year engineering heritage reduced to a name on a Samsung portfolio product. The next one built its reputation on British engineering and has quietly moved its most purchased product into territory that its original engineers would not have recognized. Cambridge Audio. Cambridge Audio was founded in 1968 by Gordon Edge, a physicist at Cambridge University who believed that the gap between what amplifiers measured and what they delivered in domestic environments was larger than the industry acknowledged. The original P40 amplifier was a direct attempt to close that gap. Cambridge Audio is now owned by Audio Partnership. The Evo series integrates the brand's amplification into a proprietary ecosystem. The Evo 75 and Evo 150 are competent products. They are also completely dependent on Cambridge Audio's software infrastructure for their primary functionality. What technicians note about the Evo series is the same pattern that appears with Sonos. The amplifier section is competent, but the streaming platform is maintained by a company whose primary revenue comes from hardware sales. When the authentication server goes dark, and eventually it will, the unit becomes an expensive chassis with drivers that no longer respond to any input you can provide. The CXA series, Cambridge Audio's mid-tier integrated amplifiers, is a different proposition. Class AB output stages, toroidal transformer, component quality that reflects genuine engineering priorities rather than ecosystem dependency. That is the Cambridge Audio worth buying. No sponsored gear, No manufacturer relationships, just what the technicians know. The CXA earns the Cambridge Audio name. The Evo borrows it and ties it to a server you do not control. Buy this if you want the CXA series, genuine engineering at an honest price without ecosystem dependency. Avoid it if you are buying the Evo series expecting the software platform to be supported for the 15-year lifespan a well-built amplifier should have. Two brands, two different ways of borrowing a reputation. The third built its professional credibility on equipment that mastering engineers still use today and has a consumer receiver line that shares nothing with it except the badge. Pioneer. Pioneer's professional credibility is specific. TAD reference amplifiers, broadcast components, equipment trusted by mastering engineers worldwide. That engineering culture is real, and it is documented. The consumer VSX receiver line shares none of it. The amplification stages in current VSX entry receivers use third-party Class D modules that appear across the consumer market at this price point. The chassis construction uses thin steel panels that resonate audibly under load. The power supply is a switching design specified to the minimum viable standard for the stated output. The Pioneer Elite series sits above the standard VSX line and carries more engineering substance. The vintage Pioneer SX series, the SX1250 and the SX1980 represent some of the most honest mid-market engineering ever produced. A Pioneer SX1250 in good condition will outperform most current receivers at twice the price on every measurement that matters for two-channel listening. The professional line earns the Pioneer name. The consumer entry line borrows it. Buy this if you find vintage Pioneer SX series receivers in confirmed working condition, that engineering is worth seeking out. Or if your budget reaches the Elite series, avoid it if you are buying current production VSX entry receivers. The Class D modules inside are the same ones you will find in receivers at half the price. Three brands, three different ways the consumer line fails the professional reputation. Before the final two brands on this side of the list, if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe now. Quick question. Have you ever opened the chassis of a receiver you paid serious money for? The next two have a combined failure history that spans 2 continents and 30 years. The fourth ended a company. Onkyo. Onkyo built a genuine reputation for mid-market amplification from its founding in Osaka in 1946. The TX series receivers from the 1970s and 1980s are still on technicians' benches for routine maintenance, not because they are being repaired, but because they are still being used. That is a reliable indicator of original build quality. Then came the HDMI board. Between 2014 and 2019, Onkyo used an HDMI switching board design across multiple receiver models that failed under sustained thermal load at a rate that generated class action litigation and contributed to the company filing for bankruptcy protection in 2022. The amplification in these units still works. The HDMI board, which handles every audio and video signal in a modern receiver, fails. Without it, the unit becomes an expensive 2-channel amplifier with no inputs that matter. Onkyo was subsequently acquired by Sharp Corporation. Before 2014, Onkyo is genuine mid-market engineering worth finding. The 2014 to 2019 generation requires careful inspection before any purchase. Buy this if you find Onkyo equipment from before 2014 in confirmed working condition. Avoid it if you are buying second-hand units from 2014 to 2019 without verifying the HDMI board. Ask the seller to demonstrate HDMI switching before you commit. If they cannot, walk away. 4 brands. The fifth did not fail through ownership changes or software dependency. It failed through a specification sheet that was never honest to begin with. Sherwood. Sherwood Electronics has manufactured amplifiers and receivers since the 1950s with genuine mid-market credibility in its early production. The current Sherwood product line is managed by the WinPlus Group, which sources consumer electronics manufacturing from contract facilities in Asia. The engineering culture that built the brand's early reputation did not survive that transition. What technicians note about current Sherwood receivers is the output power specification. Sherwood rates its receivers at output figures measured under single-channel conditions at 1 kHz into 8 ohms. Under real listening conditions, all channels driven simultaneously, the sustained output is typically 40 to 60% of the stated specification. The components inside reflect a cost target, not an acoustic one. Output power specifications that require careful reading, built to a price point, the stated specifications do not honestly represent. Buy this if you need basic amplification for a secondary system and understand that the stated output power is a single-channel measurement. Avoid it if you are buying Sherwood based on output power comparison with better specified alternatives. The comparison is not made on equivalent terms. 5 brands, 5 receivers that charge for engineering they do not deliver. The technicians already know what they buy instead. Rotel. Rotel has manufactured amplifiers and receivers in Japan since 1961 under consistent ownership focused on acoustic performance. The engineering philosophy has never changed hands and has never been redirected toward a different primary objective. What technicians find when they open Rotel chassis is consistency, toroidal transformer, discrete output stages, component quality that matches the specification on the box rather than a single-channel test condition. The Rotel stereo receiver line represents honest engineering at an accessible price point. Class AB output stages build quality that explains why Rotel equipment appears on repair benches for routine maintenance rather than catastrophic failure. The company makes fewer products than its competitors and builds each one to a standard rather than a margin. Honest engineering from a company that has never needed a billion-dollar acquisition to justify what is inside the chassis. Buy this if you want a receiver where every component inside matches the price on the outside. Avoid it if you need the full feature count of a current multi-channel receiver. Rotel prioritizes engineering depth over feature breadth. That is the first brand that earns what it charges. The second has been building honest engineering in Cambridge since 1976, and even with Harman ownership since 2017, has maintained more engineering continuity than almost any other acquisition in this space. Arcam. Arcam has built amplifiers and receivers in Cambridge, England, since 1976. The brand became part of Samsung's Harman portfolio in 2017. That ownership context matters and should be stated clearly. What technicians note is that, unlike most Harman acquisitions, the engineering culture at Arcam has maintained meaningful continuity. The Class G amplification topology, the toroidal transformer, the component specification in the signal path. These reflect engineering priorities rather than the cost reductions that most Harman acquisitions introduce. Open an Arcam chassis, and the component quality matches what the specification states. That is rarer than it sounds in 2026. The Class G topology that Arcam developed, combining the efficiency of Class D with the sonic characteristics of Class AB at listening volumes, is not something a purchasing department designs. It is something an acoustic engineering team develops over years. Harman ownership since 2017, but engineering continuity that most acquisitions do not preserve. The chassis confirms it every time. Buy this if you want a receiver where the engineering decisions were made by audio engineers rather than a purchasing department. Avoid it if you need the feature count of a current multi-channel receiver. Arcam builds deep, not wide. Here is the principle I want you to take away from this video. One sentence. The brand name on the front panel tells you what the marketing department decided to charge. The power supply inside tells you what the engineering department was actually given to work with. 3 words: honest, specified, serviceable. Every brand that failed on this list scores 0 on at least 2 of those 3 at the price point where most buyers make their decision. Every brand that passed scores 3 out of 3, and neither of them needed a celebrity endorsement to justify what is inside the chassis. Which receiver surprised you most, the one that failed or the one that passed? Drop it below. See you next time.